Ừ. Xin chào tất cả các bạn đang có mặt trong buổi hội thảo ngày hôm nay. Hôm nay xin tự giới thiệu thì mình là My, rất là vui khi được đồng hành cùng với bạn trong buổi hội thảo ngày hôm nay ha. Thì hôm nay chúng ta sẽ có một buổi hội thảo liên quan đến writing với topic là bí quyết nâng điểm IELTS Writing cùng với chuyên gia IELTS là thầy Justin Peck. Và hôm nay thì được sự hỗ trợ từ IELTS và từ thầy. Nên chúng ta sẽ cùng nhau khám phá và chinh phục điểm số IELTS như mong đợi các bạn nhé. Và các bạn ơi, thì hôm nay chương trình của mình sẽ được nhắc là hôm nay thì chúng ta sẽ tham gia buổi workshop online, do đó mình sẽ có hai kênh tương tác chính và các bạn sẽ thấy là có hai ô, thì một ô sẽ là khung chat box và một ô là khung Q&A section. Thì các bạn vui lòng tương tác với IDP và cả diễn giả của chúng ta trong ngày hôm nay bằng khung chat box các bạn nhé. Và với các bạn nào mà có câu hỏi, có những băn khoăn và các bạn muốn dành những câu hỏi này đến cho các diễn giả thì các bạn có thể share những câu hỏi của mình trong khung chat box các bạn nhé. Và các bạn và thầy ngày hôm nay thì sẽ giúp chúng ta check những cái câu hỏi của mình trong khung Q&A và các bạn giúp mình là tương tác với chương trình và với diễn giả qua khung chat box ha. Và bây giờ mình sẽ gọi là thử nghiệm trước bằng khung chat box giúp mình ha. Thì các bạn vui lòng tương tác giúp mình là không biết các bạn đã tham gia đăng ký thi IELTS tại IDP hay chưa, và nếu mà rồi thì các bạn đã chọn ngày thi nào và với hình thức thi nào, thi trên giấy hay là thi trên máy tính, thì các bạn có thể share giúp mình trong khung chat box nha. Mình sẽ thử nghiệm trước bằng khung chat box các bạn nha. Các bạn, cảm ơn các bạn thí sinh, một số các bạn đã tương tác rồi đấy ạ. Có bạn thì thi ngày 9 tháng 12 trên giấy, ngày 25 trên giấy ha. Các bạn thì chưa đăng ký dự thi nhưng mà đang đăng ký dự thi trên máy tính. Cũng có khá nhiều bạn là mình thi trên máy tính ha. Bạn ơi, buổi ngày hôm nay thì chúng ta sẽ được record lại ở trên fanpage của IDP cũng như là kênh YouTube hoặc là trên nền tảng TikTok. Do đó nếu các bạn nào mà có thời gian không có thời gian hoặc là mình bận trong sáng ngày hôm nay thì chúng ta có thể xem lại ở các nền tảng của IELTS IDP các bạn nhé. Rồi, mình đang nhận được rất nhiều tương tác của các bạn từ khung chat box ha. Thì có những bạn thì đã đăng ký thi rồi, các bạn đang đăng ký thi vào những ngày thi sắp tới là tháng 11 và tháng 12 cho kỳ thi trên giấy hoặc là thi trên máy. Thì thay mặt IDP thì chúc các bạn có một kỳ thi thật là tốt và hy vọng là ngày hôm nay sẽ có đem lại cho các bạn những kiến thức bổ ích để giúp cho các bạn đạt được target như mong muốn. Còn với các bạn mà chưa đăng ký thi, đang phân vân xem là mình thi giấy hay thi máy, thì mình cũng sẽ hỗ trợ cho các bạn một vài thông tin sắp tới các bạn nhé. Rồi, và bây giờ thì mình sẽ giới thiệu qua về chương trình ngày hôm nay. Đầu tiên thì chúng ta sẽ có phần giới thiệu về IDP Education, cũng như là kỳ thi trên máy và thi trên giấy và các chương trình promotion trong tháng 11, tháng 12 sắp tới. Và hy vọng là sẽ giúp ích cho các bạn mà đang băn khoăn và mình chưa biết thi kỳ thi nào sắp tới ha. Tiếp theo thì mình sẽ đến phần chia sẻ của thầy Justin về kỳ thi Writing. Chúng ta sẽ đi qua hai phần Writing Task 1 và Task 2. Thì có thể thầy sẽ dành khoảng 5 phút phần Q&A cho phần Task 1 và sau đó mình sẽ bước qua phần Task 2. Và sau khi mà thầy hoàn thành xong phần chia sẻ của mình thì chúng ta sẽ có tiếp thêm một phần Q&A section nữa, tầm khoảng 20 đến 30 phút tùy thuộc vào thời lượng của chương trình ha. Và mình hy vọng là sẽ nhận được rất là nhiều các câu hỏi từ các bạn trong phần Q&A và chúng mình và cùng với thầy sẽ hỗ trợ giải đáp cho các bạn trong phần Q&A ở phần cuối chương trình ha. Rồi, đầu tiên thì mình sẽ giới thiệu với các bạn về IDP Education. Thì IDP đã được thành lập vào năm 1969, thì cho đến hiện tại IDP đã có hơn 50 năm thành lập 50 năm kinh nghiệm trong việc giáo dục quốc tế cũng như là tư vấn du học và khảo thí IELTS. Với bề dày kinh nghiệm như vậy thì IDP tự tin rằng IDP chính là nơi mà các bạn có thể tin tưởng để chọn làm địa điểm đăng ký thi cũng như là tư vấn du học ha. IDP thì là chuyên gia tư vấn du học quốc tế và cũng như là trung tâm tổ chức kỳ thi IELTS số 1 hàng đầu Việt Nam và được nhiều thí sinh bình chọn ưa thích trong suốt nhiều năm qua. Ngoài ra thì chúng tôi còn có trung tâm đào tạo độc quyền Anh ngữ ACET và cũng là chủ của cổng Hot Course Việt Nam. Đây là cổng thông tin du học lớn nhất Việt Nam hiện nay ha. Rồi, với việc liên tục mở rộng mạng lưới văn phòng trong các năm gần đây thì hiện tại IDP đang có 12 chi nhánh văn phòng toàn quốc cùng với 4 văn phòng ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, ở Đà Nẵng, Nha Trang, Cần Thơ, 3 văn phòng ở Hà Nội, 1 văn phòng ở Hải Phòng và 1 văn phòng ở Vinh. Và ngoài ra thì chúng tôi còn có 6 văn phòng trực tuyến trải dài khắp toàn quốc nữa các bạn nhé. Và ngoài ra thì chúng tôi cũng có rất là nhiều kênh liên hệ. Ngoài các văn phòng trực tiếp thì các bạn có thể tới trực tiếp để tư vấn, thì các bạn có thể liên hệ qua cổng hotline là 1900 6955 trong trường hợp ngoài giờ hành chính, hoặc là cổng hotline các bạn liên hệ một vài lỗi hoặc là trục trặc thì các bạn vẫn có thể tương tác với chúng tôi qua nhiều kênh khác, đặc biệt là kênh fanpage Facebook IELTS IDP ha. Và ngoài ra thì còn có cổng Zalo nè hoặc là YouTube nữa. Rồi, về chứng chỉ IELTS thì chứng chỉ IELTS là một chứng chỉ quốc tế và test toàn diện 4 kỹ năng của các bạn là nghe, nói, đọc, viết. Và theo thống kê hiện tại thì đã hơn 11.500 tổ chức trên toàn thế giới đã chấp nhận kết quả thi IELTS rồi. Và chính phủ Úc, Canada, New Zealand và Anh thì đã sử dụng IELTS cho mục đích định cư. Và các nhà tuyển dụng, các trường đại học và các tổ chức trên toàn thế giới bao gồm cả Mỹ thì cũng đã chấp nhận kết quả thi IELTS rồi. Và các bạn thấy là với cái mức độ phổ biến của kỳ thi IELTS như hiện nay thì sẽ mở ra rất nhiều cơ hội cho các bạn khi các bạn tham gia đi du học này, hoặc là đi định cư, hoặc là apply vào các công ty quốc gia, đa quốc gia ha. Rồi, và có hàng triệu lượt thi IELTS tại IDP hàng năm. Với kỳ thi IELTS thì đã được tổ chức ở hơn 140 quốc gia rồi, và chứng chỉ IELTS riêng tại Mỹ thì đã được chấp nhận ở 3.600 tổ chức và các chương trình ha. Và ở IDP thì chúng tôi đã có hơn 4.000 địa điểm thi trên khắp thế giới. Vậy thì mục đích các bạn thí sinh tham dự kỳ thi IELTS là để làm gì? Thì với kỳ thi IELTS sẽ có 2 mục đích chính, đó là các bạn dành cho các bạn đi du học hoặc là đi làm ở đi định cư ở nước ngoài. Ngoài ra ở nhiều năm gần đây thì có rất nhiều các bạn thí sinh gọi là thí sinh cấp 2 cấp 3 tham gia kỳ thi IELTS để các bạn có thể được miễn tiếng Anh kỳ thi tốt nghiệp trung học phổ thông, và cũng như là apply vào các trường đại học hàng đầu ở Việt Nam ha. Có một số bạn cấp 2 đi test kỳ thi IELTS từ khá sớm để các bạn có thể test được năng lực của các bạn nữa. Ngoài ra khi các bạn đang là sinh viên và có bằng IELTS thì đó là một lợi thế rất là có ích cho các bạn khi mà các bạn tham gia các chương trình học bổng cũng như là các chương trình trao đổi giao lưu văn hóa quốc tế. Và sau khi mà các bạn tốt nghiệp rồi thì các bạn có thể apply vào các công ty đa quốc gia hoặc là các công ty trong nước cũng vậy. Thì nếu mà các bạn có bằng IELTS thì đây chắc chắn là một lợi thế của các bạn khi mà các bạn apply xin việc làm ha. Với nỗ lực của toàn thể IDP thì từ năm ngoái đến năm nay là chúng tôi đã có khoảng 27 địa điểm thi ở 17 tỉnh thành rồi ha. Hiện tại chúng tôi đang có các địa điểm thi ở Hà Nội, thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, Đà Nẵng, Lào Cai, Thanh Hóa, Đồng Nai, Thái Nguyên, Vinh, Bình Thuận, Hạ Long, Gia Lai, Vũng Tàu, Hải Phòng, Đắk Lắk, Cần Thơ, Thái Bình và cũng như là Bình Dương. Ở trong các địa điểm thi này thì hầu hết đều có cả 2 hình thức thi là trên máy và trên giấy ha. Và không biết là các bạn mình muốn IDP mở thêm ở các tỉnh thành nào thì các bạn có thể tương tác giúp mình trong khung chat box ha. Và IDP chắc chắn là cam kết là sẽ cố gắng nỗ lực hơn nữa để có thể xin được Bộ Giáo dục và Đào tạo phê duyệt thêm nhiều địa điểm thi nữa, để giúp các bạn là không cần phải di chuyển qua các thành phố khác, và các bạn có thể thi được tại địa điểm thi ở thành phố, ở tỉnh thành của mình ha. Nếu các bạn muốn IDP mở rộng thêm ở địa điểm nào nữa, các bạn có thể tương tác ở khung chat box giúp mình nha. Rồi, vậy thì dành cho các bạn mà băn khoăn là các bạn đang muốn thi trên giấy hay là trên máy tính thì các bạn nên chọn hình thức thi nào ha. Thì đầu tiên mình sẽ nói về kỳ thi giấy trên máy. Kỳ thi giấy tại IDP thì đây là kỳ thi cũng rất là lâu rồi, và có thể là các bạn sẽ quen hơn với kỳ thi này. Với kỳ thi IELTS trên giấy thì về địa điểm thi chắc chắn là sẽ đảm bảo cơ sở vật chất là đạt chuẩn của quốc tế, và cũng như là được sự phê duyệt của Bộ Giáo dục và Đào tạo Việt Nam. Ngoài ra thì giám khảo và giám thị cam kết với các bạn thí sinh là ở IDP thì các giám khảo và giám thị luôn luôn rất là chuyên nghiệp, và có được nhiều thí sinh feedback lại là các bạn ngoài chuyên nghiệp ra thì cũng rất là thân thiện, để có thể giúp các bạn giải tỏa căng thẳng tâm lý trong phòng thi các bạn ha. Và ngoài ra thì hệ thống đăng ký thi của IDP thì các bạn có thể đăng ký tại nhà hoặc là tới văn phòng, thì các bạn cũng đăng ký rất là nhanh chóng và dễ dàng. Và ngoài ra các bạn còn có thể lựa chọn được lịch thi nói trực tiếp trên website luôn. Thì với kỳ thi trên giấy, các bạn có thể chọn lịch thi nói là trước 1-2 ngày, cùng ngày hoặc là sau ngày thi nghe đọc viết của mình 1 ngày ha. Thì lịch thi nói sẽ trải dài tầm 3 đến 4 ngày. Tại vì là số lượng thi giấy thì sẽ rất là đông. Với các bạn thi trên máy tính thì lịch thi trên máy là trải dài từ thứ Hai đến Chủ nhật luôn, tức là các bạn có thời gian rảnh là các bạn đều có thể tham dự hết. Thì so với lịch thi giấy thì một tháng lịch thi giấy thì tầm 4 đến 5 ngày thi thôi. Thì nếu như vậy thì về cái việc lịch thi linh hoạt thì thi máy tính thì mình sẽ linh hoạt hơn ha. Và các bạn có thể chọn thi ca sáng, ca chiều hoặc là ca tối. Và 4 ngày thi, 4 kỹ năng thi nghe nói đọc viết thì các bạn sẽ thi trong cùng một ngày luôn. Nó sẽ thuận tiện hơn cho các bạn thí sinh ở tỉnh, và các bạn chỉ cần thi liền 4 kỹ năng trong cùng một ngày, và các bạn di chuyển về thành phố của mình luôn thì sẽ thuận tiện hơn ha. Ngoài ra máy tính mà IDP đang sử dụng thì sẽ 100% màn hình máy tính sẽ là cái kích thước là 21 inch, giúp là đảm bảo cái màn hình lớn để cho các bạn có thể thuận tiện khi mà mình làm bài. Và mỗi máy tính cũng sẽ có trang bị một cục UPS, thì cục này sẽ hỗ trợ các bạn khi mà có các sự cố điện, thì IDP sẽ đảm bảo được là bài thi của bạn được diễn ra một cách thông suốt trong suốt kỳ thi ha. Và trên màn hình thì các bạn cũng có thể thấy đây là hình ảnh minh họa của phòng thi máy ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh đã được khai trương vào tháng 11 năm ngoái. Thì các bạn có thể nhìn thấy là cơ sở vật chất rất là hiện đại, rất là khang trang, và tất cả các màn hình cũng như là headphone hay là UPS keyboard thì đều là rất là mới ha. Hy vọng là sẽ được đón tiếp các bạn ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. Và tháng 10 vừa rồi thì IDP ở Hà Nội cũng đã khai trương thêm một phòng máy rất là lớn nữa, và cũng có cơ sở vật chất đẹp như vậy ha. Và ở Tân Bình, IDP Tân Bình cũng vừa mới khai trương một phòng máy như vậy luôn. Thì để cho các bạn biết được rằng là IDP luôn đầu tư vào cơ sở vật chất để giúp cho các bạn tạo được sự thoải mái cho các bạn khi tham gia kỳ thi tại IDP ha. Rồi, với kết quả thi ở kỳ thi trên máy thì 3 đến 5 ngày là các bạn đã có rồi. Kỳ thi trên giấy là phải đến 13 ngày thì các bạn mới có. Do đó với bạn thí sinh nào mình cần gấp nè, mình cần thi liền, hoặc là chữ các bạn xấu chẳng hạn, thì mình cân nhắc chuyển qua thi trên máy tính ha. Và ngoài ra còn thì sẽ tùy thuộc vào cái sự yêu thích của các bạn nữa. Mình cảm thấy tự tin hơn với kỳ thi nào thì mình chọn kỳ thi đó, và IDP sẽ luôn luôn cố gắng là đảm bảo được các bạn luôn có chỗ thi trong các tháng mà các bạn cần ha. Và bây giờ thì mình sẽ cập nhật chương trình promotion cho các bạn trong các tháng 11 và tháng 12. Thì đây là chương trình ưu đãi đặc biệt dành riêng cho các bạn ở khu vực Tân Bình. Thì IDP vừa mới khai trương một địa điểm thi mới tại 226 Lê Văn Sĩ, quận Tân Bình. Và đây là phòng thi mới được đầu tư cơ sở vật chất rất là khang trang, với cả phòng thi giấy và phòng thi máy nữa, rất là hiện đại luôn. Và ngày thi sắp tới mà bên mình đang có để các bạn có thể đăng ký đó là ngày 25 tháng 11. Cơ hội cho các bạn nào mà cần ngày thi gấp ở khu vực Tân Bình hoặc là các tỉnh thành lân cận, và cũng như là dành cho các bạn thành phố Hồ Chí Minh luôn ha. Thì khi mà các bạn đăng ký thì các bạn có thể nhận được voucher trị giá 300.000 và một thảm lót máy tính rất là xinh xắn, cùng với bộ ôn luyện độc quyền từ IDP trị giá là 1.400.000 đồng. Và các bạn lưu ý là số lượng quà tặng có hạn, do đó các bạn nhớ nhanh chóng mình đăng ký thi khi mà mình có nhu cầu ha. Ngoài ra đây là một chương trình dành cho các bạn thi máy tính các ngày trong tuần từ thứ Hai đến thứ Sáu, toàn quốc luôn các bạn ha. Và dành cho các bạn thi trên máy tính, thanh toán lệ phí thi từ ngày hôm nay cho đến hết ngày 31 tháng 12, dành cho các ngày thi từ tháng 1 năm 2024. Thì các bạn cũng sẽ nhận được voucher 300.000 và bộ tài liệu luyện thi trị giá 1.400.000 đồng. Và như mình cũng chia sẻ là số lượng quà tặng thì có hạn, do đó là các bạn nhanh chóng đăng ký thì mình sẽ nhận được có cơ hội nhận được quà tặng như trên ha. Và qua đây thì MC cũng xin giới thiệu cho các bạn một chương trình rất là hấp dẫn mang tên là IELTS IDP. Đây là chương trình được lấy cảm hứng từ các bạn thí sinh. Khi mà các bạn nhận được điểm thi IELTS thì các bạn rất là vui vì các bạn đã đạt được target rồi và các bạn gần đạt đến cái ước mơ du học định cư của mình. Do đó IDP đã có chương trình này, thì khi mà các bạn tham gia chương trình thì các bạn chỉ cần là post một cái bài post có hình ảnh hoặc là video của bản thân và chứng chỉ IELTS đang cầm trên tay, và kèm một câu chuyện của mình để có thể truyền cảm hứng cho các bạn thí sinh mà các bạn chưa thi, thì các bạn có thêm động lực để mình có thể đạt target giống như các bạn. Và IDP xin cam kết là 100% các bạn tham gia chương trình này đều được nhận quà tặng ha. Thì mỗi thí sinh sẽ được quà đó là phiếu mua sắm trị giá là 100.000 đồng. Hy vọng là các bạn thí sinh khi mà mình đạt được điểm cao thì các bạn nhớ đến chương trình này để giúp cho các bạn thí sinh khác, các bạn có thể lan tỏa được nhiều cái động lực cho các bạn thí sinh khác ha. Và các bạn cũng có thể download app IELTS by IDP về. Đây là một cái app mà IDP tạo ra để dành riêng cho các bạn thí sinh, để giúp các bạn dễ dàng hơn trong việc là học và thi IELTS. Thì trong app này là các bạn có thể đăng ký thi IELTS một cách thuận tiện và nhanh chóng, và trong app cũng sẽ tổng hợp tất cả các tài liệu ôn thi miễn phí và tư vấn của các chuyên gia IELTS IDP để hỗ trợ các bạn trong suốt quá trình các bạn ôn thi. Và sau khi các bạn thi xong thì mình có thể tra cứu điểm thi dễ dàng ở trên app luôn. Và các bạn cũng có thể share được điểm thi của mình trên các nền tảng Facebook, TikTok của mình luôn các bạn ha. Và tham gia luôn chương trình IELTS IDP luôn để nhận quà của IDP. Và để theo dõi thêm các chương trình promotion mà các cập nhật và cũng như là các kiến thức mà các chuyên gia đã chia sẻ, thì các bạn có thể truy cập vào kênh YouTube của IDP có tên là IELTS IDP Việt Nam ha. Các bạn có thể xem lại các chương trình mà IDP đã tổ chức tại trên kênh này luôn. Và chúng tôi có nền tảng TikTok cũng tên là IELTS IDP Việt Nam luôn. Các bạn có thể nhấn nút theo dõi đó ha, để mình có thể cập nhật được các video hữu ích liên quan đến kỳ thi IELTS. Và bây giờ thì chúng ta sẽ không để các bạn đợi lâu nữa, mình sẽ bắt đầu vào buổi workshop của chúng ta luôn ha. Và chúng ta sẽ đến phần chia sẻ của thầy Justin Peck. Thầy là chuyên gia có kinh nghiệm khoảng 17 năm trong việc giảng dạy tiếng Anh nói chung và IELTS nói riêng rồi. Và chúng ta sẽ cùng chào đón thầy ha. So good morning Justin. Now please join me to welcome Mr. Justin for the writing workshop today.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all here today. So we'll get started straight away. As you've been told, please ask questions after the first description about task 1. Okay. There will be some times for you to interact, and I will ask you a few questions, and you can use the chat, but save the Q&A for only questions, please. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, got to make sure that this is working well. In a second. No. Okay. Share that again. Okay. Here we go. Lovely. Yeah. Now, so very quickly, just for as a quick quiz, only a few questions. Please put them in the chat. Okay. Which task should be approximately 150 to 200 words? Okay, very good. Task 1, yes. If you are writing more than 200 words, it's fine, but you're wasting time. Okay, so aim for 100 to 200 words. All right. Next question. Which task is worth more? That's right. Task 2, it is worth a lot more, approximately double. How long for both tasks? That's it. Yeah, of course, 60 minutes or 1 hour. For task 1, 20 minutes, and task 2, 40. Okay. Is spelling important? Yes, it's very important. Yes. Unfortunately, those who do the computer-based test, there is no spell check. Which task should you not give your opinion? That's right. Very good. Task 1. That's great. So let's get on. So obviously, lots of the graphs that you're going to possibly get are obviously the line graph, the bar chart, the pie chart, and the table. These are very common. All these tasks are quite common, so you never can predict what you will get. We have the mixed graph, we have the process, and the map. Okay, so we're going to go through some of these very briefly. Many of you will be taking your tests soon, so hopefully this will be a kind of review if you've done lots of studying for the IELTS for task 1 and task 2. So the good news for task 1 is you only need a certain amount of language. Obviously, a language of change with dates and trends, compare and contrast with all tasks, process, staging, active and passive. We'll go through that a little bit later, and directional language. So compass points and positioning, which can also help you for listening part 2. Now, so some key points for task 1. Obviously, aim to do it in 20 minutes. Task 2 writing is worth double, so do that one first. Now, I always recommend to do task 2 first. You don't have to. But remember, if it's worth more, try to do that first. If you're not quite finished in 40 minutes, go to task 1, make sure you've got that completed, and then go back as well. So the bodies of task 2 are quite important, of course. The conclusion is important, but if you're aiming high, you must finish all. But remember, you've got to make sure that you have enough words in both. The good news for those doing it on the computer is you have a word count. If you're doing the written-based tests, count how many you've got across, like 10, and then count 16 lines for task 1, if you get time, okay? Because if you don't have enough, you can lose points. Now, remember, task 1 is still important, okay? So remember, if you do very well in task 2, but you don't do so well in task 1, it can bring you down quite significantly. So try to aim to finish task 1 as well. If you only have, say, 20 words in task 1, then it can be a very low score. So make sure that you try to get those 150 words in. Okay. Next. Now, for task 1, every task must have a clear overview. Otherwise, you cannot score over a 5 for task achievement. All components must be mentioned. So if there's a lot of different countries, mention them all. However, if there's only if the country doesn't produce much, for example, only mention them very briefly. Obviously, 150 words or more. Wrong data can reduce your score to a 5.0 or lower. So make sure that your data is correct. All right. So for an 8, if you're aiming high, key features are skillfully selected and presented. Okay, make sure it's clear, skilled, appropriate overview. Okay. For a 7, key features, but more could be fully illustrated or extended. A clear overview. Make sure that the overview is very clear. Okay, we'll cover overviews shortly. Okay, make sure that the appropriate format is used, meaning making sure that, you've got a nice clear, gaps between the intro with the overview, or overview can be separate, then the bodies as well. Making sure that you use the right kind of language for that. Key features are adequate, and some details may be missing for a 6. So doesn't mean the categories, but make sure maybe some of the data. For a 5, no overview. So make sure that you remember the overview. You can put the overview in the bottom. However, I don't recommend it, and put the overview just under the introduction. Okay. So for task achievement, summarize the information, select and highlight key features, make comparisons, organize your response logically, accurate information, to kind of summarize that. Okay. Now, obviously, it's got to be, you've got to have a good coherence and cohesion. Basically, it means having a logical flow, easy to read. The examiners want to read it as quickly and easily as possible. Don't try to confuse them. It's got to be well linked, but try not to overlink as well. Use reference. We'll cover that a little bit later as well, instead of repeated phrases. Okay, for the lexical resource, using a variety of vocabulary, less common words related to the task. Okay, so not trying to use phrases you don't know the meaning of. Avoid vague language, tends to, seems to. I see a lot of this in writing, apparently, as well. So stay away from those. Obviously, avoid spelling mistakes, and stay away from those opinions. It's okay if you mention we can see, but it can be seen. So try to stay away from any kind of personal pronouns. Now, here is an example. This is taken from Pauline Cullen. I'll give you a link to that later. So she highlights that these are some of the phrases or some of the collocations that will reduce your score. Okay, demonstrates. So that's more like showing something in another way. So try to stay, illustrates, etc. You can see some of these are actually wrong. Okay. So try not to just try and use your best vocabulary because they might be inappropriate. Instead, just simply describe the graph. Okay. If you want to look at this in detail, obviously it's recorded. You will be able to review some of these slides later. So grammatical range and accuracy, obviously a wide range of the structures. I will show you some of those a bit later. Avoid grammatical errors. Punctuation is clear, especially for those writing on the paper test. Make sure that your full stops and commas are clear because it might affect your coherence. For a high score, make sure that your articles are correct. Okay. Here are some simple sentences. Once again, you can review this later. I will not read all the way through. So some simple sentences that you might want to practice. There we go. And more importantly, some of the complex ones. Now, this number 5 is a very good one to use if you are running out of time. So the number of cars declined slightly in 2001, remaining constant, or which remained constant in the next 5 years, growing slightly in 2008 and leveling out. Okay, so this is a very good one if you're running out of time, but remember, just to remember the word count is still important. Okay. Now we get to the overview. So highlight the most striking features. You don't need to write too much. Overall is a very good one. It shows that the examiner that you had that overall in there. If you're concerned about a lack of words, then the most striking feature of the graph is, okay, or the chart. Now, this is an example here. And so we've got to identify the overall for this, obviously with the line graph. Now, a very good way to do that is to think about it in this kind of, think about what's at the beginning and it's at the end. Okay, so think about highlighting the, and see the kind of degree of change that is there. So for example, like this. So we just think about the beginning and the end for the overview. We could add a little bit extra as well, but remember, no data in the overview, no percentages. Here is an example. So the line graph compares the production of energy from coal in 4 European countries over a 15-year period between 1995 and 2010. Overall, the percentage of energy produced from coal declined in 4 countries in the time frame, but with Denmark dropping the most and Germany making a slight recovery in the last 3 years. So you can see there's no actual data. The data will be used in the body. Remember the overview. If you forget to do the overview in the beginning, it can be separate from the introduction and it can be placed at the bottom. But I recommend to do it after the introduction because it reminds you that it is important. Now, one thing I see quite often in writing is many people explaining up to this point and using this as one paragraph and this as another. Remember, the examiner wants to read it in the easiest way possible. So instead of doing it in two halves, simply describe the details over the whole length of time. It makes it a lot easier. Remember that many, especially in line graphs, many of the trends are very similar, like this, okay? So that should be one paragraph, and that should be the second paragraph, okay? You can do it like this, but I don't recommend it because the examiner wants to follow it through. As I'm reading any kind of writing, I have to keep going backwards and forwards. It takes a long time, and you may become a little bit confused as well. Okay, here's just an example. Obviously, I'm not going to read this out, but just notice the comparative languages, the trends, and the time frames as well. Okay, so nice clear gaps between each paragraph as well, and logically organizing, all right, instead of half and half. Now, the bar charts, you can see there is no time frame, so we need to make sure that we compare. And once again, organization is important. So think about what they are, like cooking, cleaning the house, washing up. These are chores. And you notice that in this, women do most chores, which is not very nice. Okay, the men tend to do more leisurely things. So once again, that's important for organization. And if you look at here, we can see with regard to household chores and turning to leisure activities, we're using comparative language, more than double. Here, spent nearly 3 times more time than women surf on the internet. So making sure that we use this kind of language as well as the number of hours or the percentage if it is. And we can see here a nice clear overview as well. Okay. Pie charts. Okay. So be careful about these, because be careful with language. This increased rapidly on this. So careful about those. Use fractions, but not just fractions as well. Okay. Remember, it is over time. And we're just describing between these. A good way to do it is to organize, is to see what that went down in one paragraph, or what went up in the other paragraph. Or we can do it from the biggest amounts or the biggest proportions, and then a separate one for the less change. Okay, there's an example again. So we've got here just over a quarter to 1/5, and you can see to only 14% here at 25, up slightly. So you can see there's a balance between fractions and also different percentages. Something a little bit more, I would just change this at nearly 12%, so approximations. We cover that again a little bit later. Now, so this is getting you a little bit more involved. So in percentages, what is 1/5? You can put the answers in the chat. Okay. So, okay, yeah, very good. Okay, 20% indeed. 1 in 20, everybody? 5 seconds. %5. Okay. A quarter, how many percentage is a quarter? Yeah, there we go. 1 in 10. That's it. 3/5. 60%. Okay, half. Very good. 4/5. Yep, very good. 3/4. Excellent. And 2/5. Yeah, there we go. But remember that for many of these, they will not be exactly 20%, say 25%. So instead, we need to use approximations. So for this time, think about what the percentage is and where does it match on here. So, for example, 49% is which one on the left side? Okay, that's it, nearly a half. Very good. 5% for the quick typers. That's it, very good. A very small number. 27%. Uh, 27%? No, for this one. Yes, just over a quarter. 90%? $97, sorry. Almost all, very good. 85. That's it, very good. A very large majority. 58. That's it, approximately 60. You should always write approximately as well instead of approx, but this is good for here. 32. Almost at a third, that's right. 77. Yeah, just over 3/4. 68. Not quite there. Someone mentioned it earlier. Okay, around 2/3. And last one, 18. That's it, nearly a fifth. Excellent. Okay, so when we look at the tables, remember that some of these tables, okay, this table is is exactly the same as this line graph. Okay, so we approach it in the same way. So seeing about how it is over time. Likewise, for bar charts like this, we simply think about how this particular percentage here, okay, is very similar to, well, it's exactly the same as this. Okay, so 53, 63, etc. So we treat it in the same way, just using comparisons. If you can see, if you get this, we've got to mention each of these locations, and we need to mention at least once domestic, agricultural, and industrial. Okay, highlighting, obviously, the main parts in each category here. An example for this is turning first to Kuwait and Bahrain. Kuwait had the highest use of water at 63%. In contrast, the remaining 4 countries use much more water for agriculture. Once again, each country is mentioned at least once. And remember, you can have more than 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs, etc. Finally, all 6 countries used very low amounts for industrial purposes, all under 8%. The only exception is Kuwait, just under 20%. So when we look again here, so when these numbers are very low, we only need to mention very briefly. Okay. Now, so some of the language we need for this, remember, if it's a table over time, use a language of change. However, be careful about some of the phrases, like slowly, gradually, unless it goes beyond 2 years. Use fractions or qualifiers as well, approximations. Yeah, so a good variation of vocabulary there. If it is a table over time, it can be analyzed as a line graph. Okay. Once again, grouping is very important. You don't need to write every single detail, but you need to be able to summarize. And remember, to mention each category, even if it's briefly. Okay, just as I mentioned there. Okay, if you get a mixed graph, this comes up quite a lot. And remember, with these, this basically means you've got to summarize even in a briefer way as well. But there's a big difference in this, and you need to paraphrase the task for both of them. So the line graph illustrates and the bar chart measures, and also you need to make sure that you have an overview for both of them. Okay. So you can see here the publication rates of males remain more or less stable, whereas those females increase significantly. It can also be seen. So going back there, you can see that this one warrants very little. Okay. For this one, we can see this is the most important part, but we do need to mention these briefly. An example for those, okay, are, in a sec, there we are. So you can see in this part, there's only like 2 lines, okay, 2 sentences, complex sentences put together. Okay, you can see in the bottom graph, Sheffield, York, and Birmingham, they all produce less than 45. Overall, Birmingham produced the least. So for the second one, Warwick is the most important part, but the rest are mentioned briefly. So you can see for these. Okay, so a mixed graph. So when we think about those, compare and contrast language of change again. However, be careful, as many times one graph might only have one date, as the above demonstrates. Now, you need a longer overview, and you need to describe both graphs. The good news is you can describe one graph and then the other, right? Which saves, it's easy to organize. But be careful. Do not describe graphs when they are two different graphs with different headings. Okay. So just to go back to that very briefly, these would have different headings for both of those. Okay. Okay. When we move to the process on here, for this one, we use slightly different language. We still need an overview as all task ones. Think about the stages as well. Okay. Make sure you give an overview of the complete process. And remember that some things do change. So if they're from leaves, they do become something else like tea later. And you've got to really kind of highlight that. These are some of the linking first, following this, afterwards. And now, because this is a man-made process, then you can see on this, we used the passive. Now, so process language, man-made process, use the passive tense. Okay. Natural processes, we can use the active tense. And remember to stay in, you can stay in the passive all the time for a man-made process, and for a natural, you can stay in the active. You don't need to mix them up. Okay. This is an example of an introduction for one. The diagram illustrates the procedure in which bricks are made for the building industry. Overall, the production of bricks undergoes a rather complex process, which comprises of 7 stages, starting with excavation of clay and culminating in delivery. So just simply mention the first part here, and then the last part here, and how many stages. Okay. Okay. Now to the map. So for this particular one, I would recommend making a compass like this. Also, think about on the right side of the map, on the left side of the map as well. So draw this to remind you to mention those. Okay. Once again, the map is quite complicated sometimes, but we do not need to mention everything. Organization is very important for this as well. So we could organize it with all the details on the east side for the first paragraph, comparing the 2 different dates, and then on the west side. We could also think about the bigger changes as well. So you can see there's more industry on the east side, and on the you can see there's more accommodation on the west side. Okay, there's an example. I won't read it out this time, but you can see from this the most noticeable change: many green areas with other infrastructure projects. Okay, and accommodation in the west side of town. Once again, for this, in the south, over the river, east of the town, west of the location. Okay. There are obviously lots of these kind of phrases as well. Obviously, you won't be able to use all of them, but 1 or 2 of them would be very good. And likewise, mix these kind of prepositional phrases with points on the compass as well. Okay, so just to make sure that all your language is varied. Okay, now for each, as a kind of summary for these particular graphs, remember to kind of review language change and trends, compare and contrast, and the process. For the map, you should be aware of the compass points and positional language. Don't forget, these are these types of usage are frequently in listening, part 2 or section 2. Okay. So from those, let's go into a little bit of the language or the grammar for here. Remember some of the past tenses you might need. Always highlight as well. Okay, we can use the past perfect, present perfect, and some graphs go in the future. So if it is in the future, what I would generally recommend is to draw a line to now and then describe it once again. Describe them all the way to the end. Okay, so these two would be described together, and this would have its own separate paragraph. Okay, that's the easiest way to organize it. Okay, remember to paraphrase the task. You don't need to remember. If it says shows, you can say illustrates or outlines. Okay, from that, the quantity, the information, genders. Once again, during the 10-year period from 1990 to 2000 is slightly longer. Okay. Some of the phrases. So introducing the set data. Okay. Beginning with introducing the second, meanwhile. Make sure that each paragraph is very clear to read in. Remember, leave a gap between the paragraphs. It's a lot easier and clearer for the examiner to mark. Okay. So, introduce the first trends and some of the exceptions for that as well. Okay. So you can see here the first result worth pointing out is that we've got quite a few words there. So remember, maybe some of these longer phrases will help you get to your 150 word mark and above. Okay. So many of you who've been studying, you should be familiar with these kind of phrases when you go and do the test soon. Remember, these are good phrases here: a twofold rise, fourfold rise, quadruple. These are stronger ones of the escalate, soar, any of these. We're going to have a little practice of this in a minute. Likewise with down, from these, halve, slump, plummet, stronger ones there. Obviously, remember you need your tenses on those as well for the verbs. Okay. And for some of the middle ones, we don't need to remember stabilize at, level off at as well. Okay. Fluctuation, so you'll all be familiar with those as well. To fluctuate, a fluctuation. Now, something I want to highlight. Remember that a peak is like a mountain. Okay, reach a peak, a high point of, hit a peak of, and to peak at. Remember, peak at is a verb phrase. A peak of is a noun phrase. Okay, this is not necessarily a peak. It finishes at a high, at its highest point. Okay, remember a peak should go down like that. Once again, going the other way, hits its lowest point of, dipped on here as well. So remember those. And so one thing that I generally find when I'm marking, the mix between adjective and adverbs. So be careful about those as well, because yeah, don't forget that adverbs are a little bit more flexible, adjectives before the main noun. Okay, and we've got the very extensive change, average, and a small change as well. You don't need to remember every single one of them, of course, but just try to use them, try to vary some of them. Now, so this is getting you a little bit more involved just for a few minutes. Once again, in the chat, simply which ones, there's more than one, which ones are good for this particular trend? Excellent, yeah. So number 2 is the best one. Okay, yeah. So customer numbers fluctuated slightly or slightly fluctuated. We can also talk about fluctuation in numbers. Number 4 is okay. Yeah, that's fine. But once again, 2 is better for that one. Very quickly to the next one. Okay, some of you mentioned 4, not necessarily for this one. So number 3, numbers fell steadily. That's it. Number 2 is okay, but once again, number 3 is better. You'll see the difference between that and another very shortly. What about this one? Yeah, number 2, that's right. That's very good, yes. There we are. Number 4 is okay as well. Yeah. Some of you mentioned 3. It was downward trend, but it doesn't really mention the... doesn't really mention that, okay? But we can use, someone just mentioned wildly. We can say erratically or erratic. It's fine. Wildly is fine. Wine should be fine. Okay. For this one, what number? Number 3, that's right. Number 3 is fine. And number 2. Number 2 is fine. That's it, 2 and 3. For the next one. That's it. Customer numbers plunged. That's it, yeah. So you can see the difference between the one before, where it was quite gradual. For this one, it's obviously a lot stronger. So plunged is a better one for that. And this one. Yeah, so 1 and 3. But once again, we've got the adjective on here, a slight dip. So obviously this is a lot better. Yeah. So yeah, so customer numbers dipped is fine, but number 1 is better for that. Okay, good. Now, just remember some of the verbs to describe trends. From and to, with the prepositions of by here as well. Okay. And then nouns. So you see the difference. So prepositions are quite important because they can change the meaning. And that could result in some of your data being slightly confusing as well. So be careful with prepositions. So remember when it doesn't change, it started at, peaked at, or a peak of, okay? Reaching, finishing at. We've got our fluctuation between and. The percentage is fluctuated around that particular number as well. Okay. So once again, just a little bit of interaction here. So let's go through these very quickly. I'm not going to give you too long. So, what's the first one? What preposition do we use? Okay. So for this one, to. But yeah, it depends on the context. It could be by if it was another number before, but to is a better one for that. Now, what about this one? Remain constant. Yeah, very good. At. So we see that when it remains constant. Next one, profits increased. Yep, from to. Excellent. Next one. Okay. Number 4. Okay. Yeah, by. Once again, someone mentioned to. Once again, it depends on its context, but usually by for that. Next one, number 5. A peak. Oh yeah, some of you fell for it. Yeah, a peak of. Remember, bike sales peaked at, if it was a verb, reached a peak of when it's a noun phrase. Okay. With the next one, number 6. At would be okay, but with for this one. Okay. So with nearly 3,000 cars traveling on the road. Okay. At nearly would work as well. Number 7. Okay, very good. A steep increase in. Another little clue here. Number 8, company stood. Yeah, you see, stood at. Excellent. For the next one, number 9. Yeah, between. Very good. And the last one fell. There we go. Excellent. There we go. So make sure your prepositions are correct. Yep, there we go. Now, remember with the language of amounts. So for this, the number of and many with countable nouns, uncountable, amount of, and much. Be careful with much as well. It's usually used in the negative. Now, instead of saying the number of many, many, many times or the amount of, we can use these as kind of synonyms, okay? The proportion, the percentage. Be careful of rate. Remember, rate is to do with speed, but it should be fine for some. The quantity, the figure, and the data. So these are good ones to use. So use these as kind of synonyms. Okay, and reference language as well. Okay, so we got to think about these. These come up quite a lot. And instead of repetition, we can use reference language. So what do we have for the first one? Which one of these do we have? Can we use? Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, did so. So whereas instead of using repetition, where I went to the cinema in there, more than half said they did so in that particular next year, okay, or the next decade. Now, what about the next one? Not quite for that one. Okay, an admission charge, this or that should both work. Okay, yep, there we go. Next one. in that order. Yes. Okay, very good. In that order. So that's right. So 24% for plays, 22% for art galleries, respectively. Try not to overuse. I would recommend just 2 times. We could also use in that order or correspondingly as well, but be careful how you use it, like the example from earlier. So it's got to be used correctly. For this one, I've arranged for this, the excursion to Stratford-upon-Avon. So what would... Okay, excellent. Forma la latter, that's very good. For this one, that's it. These, okay. Visitors, that's right. And the last one is obviously to do with 1. Okay, there we go. So think about your referencing language as well. Okay, so we also have approximation as well. We need to think about not just using exact numbers all the time. Okay, so for example here, last year, just over 90,000 mobile phones were sold in Italy. Just under 15% of people surveyed. The company will be spending just under 2 million euros on this technology, and it will cost just under $4 to produce this item. So approximations. Okay, very briefly on compare and contrast language. Many of you should know this as well. So I'm not going to read them through, but remember some of the transitions, some contrasting, on the other hand, some similarities, likewise, etc. It's just simply to highlight them. We also have here, so having the adverbial, remember we should be having, we should be making sure that we have kind of complex sentences. So whereas or while the UAE produces high levels of gas, and remember not to use any linker there. Japan produces more. Okay, so this becomes a dependent clause. Okay. And some of the other structures, once again, you can look at this later or just use, try to remember, more or less resilient than, as effective as, twice as much, or half the amount of, slightly more, both the same and equal. Okay, so now we've got a little 5-minute question time on task 1. Obviously, task 1 takes a lot longer. So please put your questions into in the question and answers. So I've got some already. Now, is it true that a candidate would receive a band 4 if he incorrect data? Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, if it's the incorrect data, it could be around a 5 or even less. All right, so be careful about that under task achievement. How do you know which ones are the key features? Pretty much, as long as you remember, each category should be mentioned. And just highlight, like in the, if it's a peak in the line graph, just make sure that you highlight it. All you're doing is describing the trends, if it is over time, and make sure that you answer those and just highlight enough from each to reach the 150 words. Remember, if there's not a lot of change, if the trend remains stable, for example, then just briefly mention it. So just see which, identify the main key features for that. Okay, I just need some water. Okay, so if a timeline of the graph covers a large period of time, such as from 1950 to 2050, what tense should I use in the overview? Okay, so what I would recommend for the overview is simply say from 1950, great changes or a dramatic rise from 1950 to 2020, then we can use the present perfect. Since then, it has continued to climb and in the future, and will continue to climb in the future. Okay, so that's one way to do that for the overview. Once again, if it's most graphs are in the past, so we use that as well. Actually, don't forget, if there's no time frame, we can use the present tense. All right, but remember, try not to mix them up. So yeah, I would say if there's no time frame, use the present tense for that. Okay. If there are two pie charts with different years, either okay, compare each section with different years, or should I sections? That's up to you. You need to organize. You can do it by the 2 different years. Okay, but be careful, because remember, you need to be able to compare. You should be using compare and contrast language. And for that, you should be comparing across graphs if they are the same headings, okay? So in that way, make sure that, yeah, that's the best way. But if you compare the first part and the pie chart, make sure there's lots of comparisons in the second pie chart with the first, okay? Do you have any notes about the unit? I'm not sure if I understand that question, I'm afraid. Should we spend time writing task 2 before task 1? Yes. So as I said briefly at the beginning, I would recommend writing task 2 first. If you are a slow writer, I would generally try to have a very short introduction, both bodies. And if you're around 40 minutes, go and do task 1 first, second, and finish task 1, and then jump back to task 2 and finish the conclusion. Please spend some time reading the question and checking your answers as well. Okay. Now, what are the differences between band 8 and 7 in task 1? Okay, now you can look online. There is a public descriptor. You can find those quite easily. And the descriptors have changed recently. So just look up in Google and say task 1, task 2, IELTS descriptors. And you can look and analyze those as well. Okay. I did cover that a little bit earlier at the beginning. Okay, just 2 or 3 more questions. There will be more time at the end of the presentation because task 2 is a bit quicker. But once again, I would like some time for some questions. So just a couple more. So in marking criteria, we talk about progression. So that's a bit like the flow, the coherence. So making sure that the progression is a kind of natural descriptor. That's why you should also think about, if you're in task 1, describe the whole trend, instead of 2 halves. Okay. Will the slides of the presentation sent to registered? You need to ask them, but don't forget that this will be available on several platforms. Okay. Okay, so no more questions just yet, but let's think about the last question here. So is there a difference in language between line graph, table? Yeah, so at the beginning, remember that all should be used compare and contrast language for all tasks. You need a language change when there is a time frames. You've got the process language and obviously the map and directional language for that. Okay, let's move on to task 2. Okay, so let's have a quick drink. Now, for the key points here, this is very important. Answer all parts of the task with a clear position, arguing, discussing your idea. Write in a clear, formal style. Don't forget, it's not academic. We don't need references, so don't only use passives. Okay, so, you know, we can use some passives, of course, but don't just stay in passives. Okay, it does need to be formal, but IELTS task 2 is semi-formal to formal style, but not totally formal, like referencing, etc. You should only use vocabulary you know. Trying to use high-level grammar and vocabulary can confuse. Vary your grammar and language as well. Okay, do not use online templates and do not believe 9.0s online, some of these. Okay, so remember, 9.0, lots of these sites try to get you to the sites and promise you a 9.0. Remember, IELTS is being about precise, it's having the language, and it's being able to write that clearly. Obviously, we need 250 words as well for task 2. Now, for an 8, a clear, well-developed position. Ideas are relevant, well extended and supported. Well, there's our extension as well. So making sure that we have a nice, clear, you know, body paragraphs, not just listing. We've got to extend them, give examples. Now, this is also from Pauline Cullen. She has very clearly highlighted this. Now, lots of people get stuck at a band 6. And she has a video even saying about, you know, native speaker writers even doing exactly the same thing. Okay, so to get a band 7, you need to make sure that all parts of the task are addressed. It's got to be clear, it's got to be extended and supports. And this part is very important. I'll cover this again. There may be a bit of tendency to overgeneralize. We'll come back to that as a kind of explanation of that later. Okay. Now, obviously, you need to plan your writing. You need to critically think. All right. Otherwise, you will not score a 7.0 in task 2. Okay. Now, this should be highlighted. Now, for a 5.0 in task response, the main parts of the prompt are incompletely addressed. Now, what this basically means is if you see some keywords in the task and you completely write, you see like health, and then you talk about the pros and cons of staying healthy, but then it's, for example, talking about how gyms can improve health, then you've completely not addressed the task. Okay, the format may be inappropriate in places, and the writer expresses a position, but it's not always clear. Okay, Some of the cohesion and coherence again, or vice versa. Very similar to task 1. You still need clear progression. The ideas got to be arranged well, and organization for that. Okay, lots of repetition instead of using referencing words. Okay, so be careful about those. Once again, organize. When we talk about organization, making sure that paragraphs are clear, and make sure that they are separated as well. One thing I also say, if you're not very confident at writing, then use a topic sentence. That will help the examiner identify that, the main idea. Now, some of the lexical resource. So we've got here for that. Be careful about using idiomatic items. Okay. Only you can, there are, for example, things like state of the art. You know, these are kind of, it's obviously an adjective phrase, slightly idiomatic, but it doesn't mean like saying once in a blue moon. We shouldn't use that even in speaking. All right. So we've got to be a little bit careful about our word choice and collocations. So awareness of style. So that's the key part on this. Remember, it's a kind of formal, and collocation is evident. Some slips as well. But the key point I want to highlight here for a 6, you can have some errors, but these do not impede communication. So basically, it's easy to read. For 5, may cause some difficulty for readers. So just really highlight those, you know. So that's why it's important to read through once you've completed it, especially your paragraphs. You don't have to read everything, but really read through, if you get a chance, your paragraphs again. If you're on a computer-based test, it's quite easy to change. Okay, don't forget you're using a pencil and you will have a rubber or an eraser. There we are. Okay, so some of my ideas about semi-formal to formal style. Try not to use any contractions like this. Cannot is one word. All right, so stay away from that. These kind of contractions in both tasks, of course. Once again, wonderful, fantastic, terrible, great. All right, so be careful of these. It's too opinionated. Attractive prospect and negative outcome extremely beneficial. Sometimes when I'm marking, I see questions. We don't write them. Remember, you're answering a question, not creating one. There we are. So go straight in and answer the question. So, fanboys, in a formal kind of essay, then not an academic, but in a formal one, then stay away from fanboys at the beginning. Some examiners are a bit stricter maybe than others. You're graded, but there are some, there are some examiners are a bit stricter. Yeah, so some subjectiveness, that's what I was trying to think of. So because furthermore, so link them in a kind of slightly more formal way. Yeah, it's okay to use pronouns, personal pronouns. If you're asking, if you're given an opinion essay, if you're asked for to give your opinion, make sure that your opinion is clear, and you can say, for example, I believe or I strongly believe this. It's fine. But try not to overuse them as well. I noticed that when people write the word you, it's too informal and it just keeps going, and then it's repeated. If you do this, and then you will do that. Okay? Instead, put it in the third person. Given your opinion, it's fine to use personal pronouns, but stay away from words like you, because it becomes very repetitive. That's my personal advice for that. So never and always is not recommended. Very few things are never and always. So we use hedging language. Now, I come back to that 7.0. So maybe a tendency to overgeneralize. So this is the way I read it. We're not using hedging language. One thing I should highlight, if we've got two parts of the question in a particular essay, I will talk about the other side. So some people would say this could be because of ABC, and they might do this otherwise. So we use lots of hedging and or more hedging in the opposing view. But when you're writing about your own opinion, I would be a little bit stronger. Okay, so I strongly believe this can rather than could. You see? So be careful about, once again, try not to, this will always happen, etc. Next. Something I noticed, especially a lot recently, when we write the word things, okay, you're under time pressure, and it's sometimes a little bit hard to think about what those things are. They could be products or advertisements or some reasons, for example. Once again, gain knowledge, it's fine. This is a very common phrase that I've seen a lot recently, to gain knowledge. I would just simply say it's better to teach. It can teach people to do something. And try not to use etc., a so on, and ... Okay? Remember, there should be, and try to only use 3. For example, products, advertisement, and consumers. No more, no big list. So, products and advertisements. So 2 or 3 maximum. Okay, so we get to our grammatical range and accuracy. Once again, 7 for this. Grammar and punctuation are generally well controlled. That's why if you're doing the written test with pencil, make sure they're nice and clear. Okay. For 6, complex sentences are less accurate than simple structures, but they rarely impede communication. Okay. For the last one, grammatical errors may be frequent and cause difficulty for the reader. That's also why if you should quickly read through, you can't read out because you're in a test, but read it out in your mind. Some of the stages for task 2 that I should really highlight. So in the test, okay, read the question and understand the task. Spend a minute or 2 with this and make an outline. Highlight the key parts in the test. Okay, so, what it's asking you. Because that can be, once again, as I mentioned, if you just see health and write about health and you don't analyze the task, it can really reduce your task response. Decide quickly. All right? Very quickly. Answer logically, explain and make clear, and check answer. So, using, once again, Pauline Collins for this, make a point, explain the point, expand, and link back to the question. This is also quite important. If you read through again later and you realize that you've not sort of gone back to the question on the written test, then try to add in underneath. So leave that gap between paragraphs. If you cannot fit it in, it's okay to put a small star and add that underneath as well. Okay. Now, you may include any relevant examples from your own knowledge or experience. So I see this quite often. Now, okay. So remember, don't invent facts. Scientists have said that the Earth will increase in temperature by 1.5 degrees by 2030. It's not an academic essay. All right. This cannot be checked. You might have heard it on the news, but we are generalizing in task 2. So instead, there is a strong possibility the Earth may continue to heat if. So we're using this is your own opinion. We're using your own knowledge as well. Also, very important, I see this so often. Don't talk about a family member, friend, or someone you know. My family experienced flooding in the north of Vietnam. All right. Instead, many people have experienced flooding in the northern areas of Vietnam. Remember, these kind of examples should be short. And once again, these are from your own knowledge, but they support the task. So, for the introduction, now remember, you don't have much time to do an introduction. The important part is the thesis statement, the writer's opinion. It's okay to do a preview, but I would recommend it's a bit of a waste of time. So I won't go through the question, but here, we get a general statement. The rise in juvenile delinquency has been associated with the changing role of women in society. So we got the opposing opinion. Some may, there's our hedging or modal, argue that the rising number of working mothers is the root cause of this issue today. However, and this is your opinion if you're writing, it is far more complicated than that, as the media and peer pressure also contribute to this youth problem. So think about how to organize. You can see there are 3 sentences maximum here. You could even, under time pressure, you could just simply have the opposing view and also your point. As you can say here, I will discuss these below. This essay will discuss these below. You know, it's not necessary to say these. It doesn't really say much. The examiner knows that you will be discussing these below. All right. So it's fine to write this, but it's a little bit of it's a few wasted words. Okay, moving to the conclusion. Now, once again, it's for a very high score, you should have a conclusion. But if you're not going to finish your task 1, then jump to task 1 and then come back to conclusion if you have time. So restate the problem. It is clear that blood sports must be prohibited. I hope that the governments around the world discuss this, restate the opinion, and forbid this inhumane type of sports as soon as possible. Okay. Sometimes you have discussion essays, problem solution essays. For the reason for this, restate the problem again and restate the solutions here. And if you are under 250 words, simply add something under opinion. This should then give families the motivation for them to leave, thereby relieving overpopulated areas. Okay. Now, some of my ideas for self-improving. Many of you are doing the IELTS test soon. Those who are doing the computer-based test, while you're practicing at home, remember that Microsoft Word, then when you've practiced with a particular task, then copy and paste onto Microsoft Word, and you can see your own mistakes, especially with spelling and grammar. Once you have written an essay, if you have time, leave it a day and check. If not, get a friend or a teacher, rewrite and improve. Familiarize yourself with world topics. So this is quite important. Many of you will be taking the IELTS soon. Simply look up online and see what's happening around the world. There's quite a lot happening at the moment. Some of the big topics in IELTS are obviously the environment, technology, education, and the media. These are big topics in IELTS as well. If you have time, okay, build up vocabulary, Cambridge Vocab for IELTS. This is a Cambridge website, IELTS and normal practice. It gives automatic feedback, which is obviously from an algorithm. And some of those Pauline Cullen videos I was talking about, there's a link for that. She mentions some of the things I'm still learning as I go as well. And so, do you have any questions? Okay, now I'm going to Q&A for these, for task 2.
Thank you just for your sharing. Okay, so các bạn ơi, mình còn 20 phút để mình có thể tham gia Q&A. Do đó các bạn mà có câu hỏi thì các bạn vui lòng gõ vào khung Q&A giúp mình ha. Thì thầy Justin sẽ trả lời cho các bạn theo thứ tự.
Okay, so is template safe strategy in writing task 2 for beginners, and how can I avoid it? Really, you should look at the question, the task, and think about how I can answer that question. Yeah, you should. If you're, as I mentioned, if you are a kind of beginner, make sure you've got a clear topic sentence and supporting sentences, and develop those sentences as well. Okay. Okay, I missed a couple up here. So can you help me distinguish between the opinion question, agree, disagree, and the advantage and disadvantage question? Okay, can I use the same structure for both? Now, so whenever you have agree, disagree, these are asking your opinion. Simply give your opinion, okay? Make sure that your opinion is clear. You can completely agree. You completely disagree. But if there are often or nearly always 2 parts to the question. Make sure that you answer both questions. So you could agree with one part and disagree with the other. So you shouldn't focus too much on the actual, following a formula. If it is an advantage or disadvantage, then you should mention the advantages and the disadvantages. Okay, but I've not seen too many advantages and disadvantages recently, but I do see a lot. Do the advantages outweigh do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? And for that is asking your opinion. So it's asking you to say, okay, I agree that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, or no, the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. But remember, if there are two parts, which there mainly are, to the question, you must answer both. If not, you haven't answered the question, and that could be a task response of 6 or 5. Okay. If you have a problem solution, really look at the question. If it's what measures, what causes this, what measures or solutions. So for that one, you could talk about the problem, the first problem, the first result, and the solution in paragraph 1. And then a second problem is second result and its solution as well. So if it says what measures with the S, you must talk about 2. What solutions? That means you must talk about 2 solutions. Okay. How can I improve my writing speed? That's a very good question. For that one, it is hard. Now, if you are taking the computer-based test, there's a lot of touch typing tools that you could use. But for the written test, if I write a lot, my hand cramps. It's very hard to write. Okay, so you need to practice beforehand. Now, obviously, to improve speed, remember the bodies are very important. Okay, so making sure that your introduction is very short, 3 sentences maximum, go to the bodies as well, and that will help you. Okay, but do it to time. Once again, write to 40 minutes. If you're not getting 250 words, think about why. Try again. You have to really keep practicing. It's not easy. Even for many teachers or many native speakers, we would need to do lots and lots of practice for IELTS, the task 2. Okay, especially under time pressure. Now, can you explain some common generalizations? So, yeah, once again, with those generalizations, you're making ideas which are more, if you overgeneralize, as I mentioned before, you're saying that this is always the case. Yeah, this is always the case, but it's not. All right. What else? For that one, yeah, that's why hedging a language is quite important as well. And when we generalize instead of specific answers, like I mentioned, you're using data. Don't make up data. Even if you know and you've learned it at school, we generalize it. So we make it a kind of commonality as well. Okay. Are there any methods for brainstorming ideas in writing task 2? Yes. Okay. Give me a sec. So, when you get the exam paper, okay, when you see the task, on the question, okay, if you're doing the written test, simply underline on the task and just quickly make a couple of notes. Okay, so for example, if it says, let's say some of the problems, you just quickly do a couple of lines off and think about them and write a problem. And then it's solution, solution. Couple of little arrows across. And to remind you to do the solution for those, another one to say the solution for that. You don't need to make an outline for any kind of examples unless you want to do, and you can do it quick. I would recommend between about 3 minutes on an outline. Okay. Likewise with task 1 on the graphs. So if you have a pie chart and it's 33%, simply write on there, write 1/3. That will remind you to use that fraction as well. Okay. Yeah, so don't write full sentences, just the key points for those. What else do for that? Okay. So when a question has 2 parts and I only agree with one, can I say I disagree? Yeah, you can. Yeah. So as long as you address both parts, yeah, you can disagree with that. One thing I do recommend, you don't have to, when you partially agree, I always say to my students, you know, it's better to agree with one point more than another. So, you know, you could have a balanced view, but I would generally lean towards one. So when you're writing, I agree with this slightly more, like that, it's fine. Let's go back up to the top. Okay, so if my supporting ideas in the body paragraphs do not match the topic sentence, thesis statement, how influential are these on my task response? It can actually impact, yes. You can, you know, it's all about the examiner. The examiner wants to read it as quickly as possible. If it's confusing, it can affect coherence and cohesion, and it can also affect your task response as well. So yeah, make sure that they do match up. How are we doing for time? Okay, got about 5 more minutes, I think, 3 or 4 minutes. Okay. Okay, do we have any specific formula? No. So try not to follow a formula. A balanced or one-sided viewpoint. Actually, with the paragraphs, make sure they're nicely balanced. Okay, you can have one-sided, but remember, you've got to, if that's one-sided view for both, it means you've still got to address both parts. Okay, but the paragraphs would be better, nicely balanced. What I tend to see a lot in writing is a very big paragraph on one side, and then a very short one on the opposing side. So be careful. It's good to balance as well. If the questions are advantage and disadvantage, so I can point out one advantage and one disadvantage. Well, once again, I would generally, if it says what are the advantages, then you must mention 2. Okay, what are the disadvantages? Once again, mention 2 for that. All right, but if it's just what's the advantage and disadvantage, as long as you've got enough words, but address both. What else do we have? So yeah, just once again, don't try to get mixed up between discussion essay and argument essay. Just simply answer the question. That's what's repeated several times. Okay. Okay, one more. If I have no time to spelling check, how will writing examiner subtract the score and lexical resource? It depends. Once again, for this one, if it impacts the coherence, then it can actually impact that as well. Okay. Oh, excuse me. Now, very quickly, here are some key points from. If you still have lots of questions, there are these websites, Pauline Cullen, okay, and B. Oh, sorry, that's task 2, I think. I've just, it's the right link, but I think it's also task 2, okay? So some of my ideas come from that as well. And so if I've not covered anything, maybe have a look at those. Okay. Now, I know many of you have any questions, but we're just about out of time, I'm afraid. So,
Okay. Yeah. Các bạn ơi, mình biết là các bạn đang còn rất nhiều câu hỏi trong khung chat box, tuy nhiên là do thời lượng chương trình có hạn, do đó chúng ta đành là phải tạm biệt các bạn và kết thúc chương trình trong ngày hôm nay. Thì một lần nữa thay mặt IDP cảm ơn các bạn rất là nhiều vì đã dành một buổi sáng chủ nhật ngày hôm nay để chúng ta có thể lắng nghe chia sẻ từ thầy Justin về IELTS Writing. Nếu các bạn còn các thắc mắc hoặc các câu hỏi thì chúng ta sẽ cùng nhau gặp nhau trong các chương trình tiếp theo. Thì IELTS sẽ có chương trình workshop hàng tháng và có những cái chủ đề khác nhau để giúp cho các bạn có thể tiếp cận thêm các chương trình, các kiến thức liên quan đến IELTS. Thì một lần nữa cảm ơn các bạn rất là nhiều và hẹn các bạn trong chương trình lần sau. Hi Justin, thank you for your presentation today.
Hopefully it's helpful, and good luck everybody in your IDP IELTS exams. Okay? Okay, thank you.
Chúc các bạn một cuối tuần vui vẻ nhé.